The voicemail came before my grief had time to wake up. It was still dark outside, the kind of dark that feels unfinished, and I was standing barefoot in my kitchen when my phone vibrated once on the counter and stopped like it knew better than to ring twice. I didn't recognize the number. I listened anyway. Following Mr. Richard Ward's passing, the voice said calmly, professionally, "The board will convene immediately regarding leadership continuity. No pause, no condolence, just continuity." I stood there staring at the wall while the words settled into my body, and something in me went very still. My husband had been buried less than 24 hours ago, and already people were rearranging his absence like furniture. My name is Elena Ward, and I learned that morning that silence after death isn't peace, it's opportunity. The funeral itself was quiet in the way performances are quiet. Black fabric-controlled voices, people pressing my hands a little too long while their eyes drifted past me, measuring, counting, recalculating. I watched dirt hit the casket with a sound that didn't echo because some endings don't need witnesses. I didn't cry where anyone could see. I didn't collapse. I had never been the woman people expected to fall apart. I was the one who handled what came after. The numbers, the schedules, the problems that had to be solved quietly so everyone else could pretend life was normal. That was my place beside Richard. Not in front, not behind, underneath everything holding. When the cemetery emptied, I didn't go home. I went to the office. Not because I was brave, but because payroll doesn't stop for funerals and vendors don't pause invoices out of respect. The building felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Too polite, too careful. Conversations softened when I passed. Laughter came late, like people were checking to see if it was allowed. A few employees touched my arm like I might shatter. Others avoided my eyes entirely, like grief was contagious, and power was already moving somewhere else. I sat at my desk and opened the same files I had opened for years, forcing my hands to move slowly so they wouldn't betray how tight my chest felt. Routine is how you keep control when everything personal has already been taken from you. At 9:00, the calendar invite appeared. Urgent board conference room. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked down the hallway with the kind of posture women learn when they refuse to be mistaken for weak. Inside the room, Howard Ellison sat with his hands folded, his face careful, 10% ownership. Decades of partnership. He looked like a man choosing silence over honesty. Then I saw Brianna Ward. Perfect black, perfect posture, not a single red eye. She held a folder like it meant something, and when her gaze met mine, I felt a tightening. Not grief, not shock anticipation. She smiled politely. It didn't reach her eyes. The board chair spoke fast. Stability, continuity, protecting the company's future. Words said too quickly to mean what they pretended to mean. Then the sentence dropped without warning, sharp and final. Brianna would be appointed CEO effective immediately. The room didn't react, it turned toward me. That's the moment people don't talk about. The pause where everyone waits to see whether you will fight or fold. I could have stayed silent. I could have forced discomfort. But Richard's voice was still loud in my head, reminding me what pride does to unfinished legacies. So I spoke. I said responsibility can shape a person when love cannot. I said I would stay to ensure a smooth transition. I said it calmly. The board exhaled like I had just solved their problem for them. If you're listening right now, tell me where you're watching from because moments like this happen quietly in rooms just like that. And I want to know how far this story traveled to reach you. The meeting ended with polite nods and forced gratitude. Back at my desk, I kept working approving transfers, checking balances, holding the company together the same way I always had. But something inside me stayed frozen in that room watching Brianna accept authority, like it had been waiting for her. I told myself grief makes people strange. I told myself patience would steady her. I told myself my silence was protection. 4 days later, her assistant appeared at my office door. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Ms. Ward," she said softly, "Brianna wants to see you." The walk to Brianna's office felt like walking into a room where someone had already decided what you deserved. The hallway lights were too bright for the week we were in. The carpet muffled everything, but I still heard the building's mood and the little sounds that didn't belong. Someone's laughter cutting off too sharp. A printer jamming and nobody cussing like they normally would. The way my own heels sounded louder than they should because people had stopped moving when I passed. I didn't look left or right. I kept my face neutral the way you do when you can feel eyes taking measurements. A new CEO doesn't just inherit a company, they inherit a hunger from everybody watching, everybody wondering who will be safe and who will be sacrificed. Her assistant stood outside the door like a guard hands, folded tight at her waist chin. Tucked eyes glossy in a way that told me she didn't agree with what was about to happen, but also didn't have the kind of job where disagreement mattered. "She's ready for you," she said. "Not she'll see you ready like I was an appointment, not a person." I stepped inside and the door shut behind me with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. Brianna didn't stand. She stayed seated, back straight, shoulders squared her father's chair, suddenly looking too big for her, and still somehow not big enough for what she thought she was. Her desk was cleared, the way people clear a surface before they perform something. There was a folder placed neatly in the center, a pen resting on top like this was going to be official, clean, unarguable. The blinds were half turned, so the light came in narrow stripes. It put shadows across her face, not enough to hide her expression, just enough to make it look practiced. She looked at me for a long second, the way a person looks when they're checking if you'll flinch. Then she glanced down at the folder like she didn't want the emotion of the moment to interrupt the act. "Close the door," she said. Even though it was already closed, I didn't move. I stood where I was. Something in me understood that once I sat, I would be placed where she wanted me. Small, waiting, needing. I stayed standing. Brianna's mouth tightened for half a second, and I saw it. That tiny flash of irritation was the first honest thing she'd shown me all week. "Elena," she began. And the way she said my name sounded like she was removing it from something, like she was taking it off a shelf. She didn't say sorry. She didn't say thank you for everything I'd done. She didn't even pretend to ease into it. "I'm restructuring," she said, effective immediately. She slid the folder forward just an inch, like she was pushing me away without touching me. I didn't open it. I didn't reach for it. I looked at her instead. Her eyes were fixed on a point just past my shoulder. Like meeting my gaze would require acknowledging I had weight, restructuring what I asked, and my voice surprised even me. Steady, polite, controlled no. Shake, no plea. Her nostrils flared slightly. She blinked once slow, like she was tolerating a child asking too many questions. "Accounting," she said. "Operations. We're tightening everything up." She leaned back, folding her hands, and I noticed something small and ugly. How comfortable she looked saying it, like she had rehearsed it at home in a mirror, putting on her authority the way you put on lipstick. "I've handled accounting here for years," I said. Not loud, not defensive, just true. Brianna's lips curled into something that was almost a smile and almost a sneer. "Yes," she said, "and that's exactly the problem." She tapped the folder with one finger, light impatient. "You've been here too long." Her voice softened on the next part in a way that was meant to sound reasonable, as if kindness could carry cruelty better. "You're a burden." The words sat in the air like smoke, not because they were loud, but because they were chosen. She didn't say I was expensive. She didn't say the company needed new systems. She didn't say anything that sounded like business. She said burden like I was something heavy she'd been forced to carry. Like my presence was a debt she'd finally decided to stop paying. I felt my chest tighten so fast it stole a breath. But I didn't let my face react. I watched her instead. I watched what her eyes did when she said it, how they sharpened, how she waited, how she wanted to see the impact land. This wasn't about performance. This was about punishment. "Brianna," I said quietly, and I heard something in my own voice I hadn't heard before. Warning, not fear. She cut me off with a small lift of her hand like I was an interruption. "I'm not discussing it," she said. "You'll get your final check. HR will handle the paperwork. You'll turn in your keys today." She paused, then added, "And don't take it personally. This is what leadership looks like." The lie in that sentence was almost impressive. Leadership didn't look like this. Insecurity did. Grief twisted into power did. A daughter who had been swallowing something for years did. I stood there for one more beat, letting the silence fill the room because I wanted to see if she would blink first. She didn't. She held her expression steady, but I saw her fingers tighten together beneath the desk, the smallest crack in her palm. "Is that all?" I asked. Brianna exhaled like she was relieved I wasn't making it messy. Then she nodded toward the folder. "No," she said. "There's one more thing." Then she told me who was replacing me. I left Brianna's office the same way I went, in standing tall, face still, hands steady, because I refused to give her the satisfaction of watching me break inside her doorway. The hallway didn't feel like a hallway anymore. It felt like a stage after the curtain drops when the audience is still sitting there pretending they didn't just watch something ugly. People kept working, kept typing, kept whispering into phones, but their bodies were tense in a way you can't fake. They'd all heard something even if they hadn't heard the words. The assistant avoided my eyes when she offered me a thin smile that looked like apology trapped behind fear. "HR will come by," she murmured, then stepped back like my sadness might touch her. I walked past her desk without replying. My chest felt tight, not from shock anymore, but from a deeper kind of insult being dismissed, like I was a chair they didn't need in the room. In my office, I didn't sit. I stood and looked at my desk like it belonged to someone else. The stacks of folders, the calendar pinned under the glass, the little notepad where Richard used to scribble reminders for himself when he'd come in and lean against my doorframe, smiling like I was home base. I didn't let myself reach for those memories yet. I opened a drawer and took out the keys to the file cabinet. I placed them on the desk carefully, one by one, like I was laying down something sacred. The building moved around me with the kind of force normal people use when they're hoping a storm passes over without hitting their house. HR came in with a folder and a practiced voice speaking softly, like the softness made it less violent. I signed what I was told to sign without reading every line, not because I didn't care, but because I was paying attention to something else. The way they wouldn't look me in the eye, the way their hands shook just a little, the way they kept using Brianna's new title like it was a shield. "We'll mail the rest," they said. "We appreciate your years." Years like my life in this place was a calendar entry. I packed my things into a box. They handed me a plain brown box that made me feel like I was being shipped out. The staff tried to act busy, but the truth was in the pauses. A woman from payroll stepped toward my door, then stopped, then came anyway. Her face pinched with worry. "Miss Ward," she whispered. I'm sorry." I nodded once. That was all I could give. I carried the box down the hallway. My steps were quiet, but I felt every eye follow me. Not just pity, curiosity, fear. In a company like this, when a long-Irving woman gets removed, suddenly people don't just wonder what she did, they wonder what she knows. I reached the lobby when I heard Brianna's voice behind me. Bright and firm, the voice she'd been practicing all week. The one that tried to sound like her father without earning the weight. Everyone she called out. The lobby wasn't meant for announcements. It was meant for arrivals and departures, for handshakes and small talk. That's why she chose it, because she wanted my exit to come with an audience. People drifted closer, slow, cautious, like they didn't want to be counted on either side. Howard Ellison stood near the reception desk with his hands in his pockets, watching his jaw tight. His eyes met mine for half a second, long enough to say something without words. Then he looked away like he couldn't afford to show too much. Brianna stepped forward, her heels clicking sharp, her chin lifted. She didn't glance at the box in my arms. She didn't acknowledge what she had just done. She smiled like she was about to introduce a new product. "I want to thank Elena for her time here," she said, and the room stiffened at the way she spoke my name so casually, like we hadn't shared family dinners, like she hadn't looked me in the face at her father's funeral and accepted my support. "We're moving into a new chapter," she continued, "and I'm bringing in someone I trust to handle the accounts going forward." The air changed. That word trust hung like a warning. Brianna turned toward the entrance as if she was cueing someone. The lobby doors opened and a woman walked in, wearing confidence like perfume, not rushing, not hesitating, moving as if the building belonged to her. She was dressed neatly, hair smooth, expression set in a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. I knew her immediately, even though it had been years since I'd seen her up close. Evelyn Mercer Richards' ex-wife, Brianna's biological mother, the woman whose name I avoided saying in my own home because it always tightened something in Richard's throat. Brianna placed a hand lightly on Evelyn's shoulder, a gesture that was half affection, half possession. "This is my mother," Brianna announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "She'll be stepping in to handle the accounts." A murmur moved through the staff. Confusion, surprise questions swallowed quickly. Evelyn's gaze slid over the room and landed on me, like she'd been waiting for this moment. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look hesitant. She looked satisfied, like she'd finally been invited back into a house she believed she never should have left. Brianna's smile widened, and in that widening, I saw it. The real reason this was happening. This wasn't a professional transition. This was a replacement, a statement, a daughter trying to rewrite a story she'd been carrying in her chest for years. Evelyn extended her hand toward Howard first, ignoring me entirely, and Howard shook it with a stiffness that spoke louder than words. Then Evelyn turned slightly, her eyes flicking to me, with a polite nod that felt like a slap wrapped in manners. Brianna watched my face the way she watched it in her office, waiting for the break, waiting for proof she'd landed the wound. And that's when it hit me. Deep and cold, heavier than the box in my arms. I realized this wasn't about my job. The parking lot air tasted like rain and metal. That sharp smell that comes right before a storm decides whether it's going to pass over or tear something down. I set the box in my trunk with the same care I used when I used to set Richard's dinner on the table after a long day. Slow, steady, like my hands could keep the world from wobbling if they moved gently enough. When I shut the trunk, The sound echoed across the lot, hollow and final. I stood there for a moment with my keys in my hand, staring at the building that had been my second home for decades. The place where my fingerprints lived on everything, even if my name didn't. Through the glass doors, I could still see people moving heads bent over computers, shoulders hunched bodies trying to pretend routine could protect them. And I knew, without anyone telling me, that if I had spun around and marched back inside, if I had thrown that box down and demanded respect, it wouldn't have changed a single thing that mattered. It would have only fed the part of Brianna that was starving for a reaction. That's what people like her don't admit. They don't just want control. They want proof. Proof that you hurt. Proof that you're small. Proof that they can move you like furniture. I refused to give her that proof. I got in my car and sat behind the wheel without turning the engine on. My hands were still steady, but my chest felt like it was packed with cotton, thick and tight, like my body was trying to absorb the shock so it wouldn't spill out of my face. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looked broken, because she looked composed. And sometimes composure is its own kind of bruise. My phone buzzed, a message from one of my children. "Mom, are you okay? Call me." I stared at the screen and felt something soften inside me, then harden again. They were grown, both of them. Good people with steady lives they built with their own hands. They loved me fiercely the way children do when they've watched their mother carry too much without complaint. I knew if I called them right, then I would hear the anger in their voices. And anger spreads fast in families. It turns into calls and confrontations and late-night drives and words that can't be gathered back up once spoken. And I wasn't going to let Brianna's hunger pull my children into her mess. I typed back, "I'm fine. I'm coming home. I'll explain later." Then I put the phone face down. The engine started with a quiet purr, like it didn't know my life had just been rearranged. I drove home slowly, not because traffic was heavy, but because the weight in my chest was heavy. Every red light felt like a pause where my mind tried to replay what happened in Brianna's office. The way she said burden like she'd been waiting years to say it. But I refused to let my thoughts circle the insult like a dog chewing the same bone. I'd lived long enough to know that some words are traps. You pick them up and carry them, and suddenly your whole life is shaped around proving them wrong. I wasn't going to spend my days proving anything to Brianna Ward. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same, but I didn't. The front door opened before I could even step out of the car. One of my children stood there, arms crossed, eyes sharp, the kind of look that said they'd already decided to protect me, whether I asked for it or not. "Mom," they said, and that single word held so much: fear, fury, disbelief. I lifted a hand palm down a small gesture that meant not yet. I walked past them into the house, set the box on the dining table, and took a breath. The quiet inside my home felt safer than the quiet in that lobby, but it still pressed against my skin like a question. "Tell me you didn't let her do that," my child said, voice tight. "Tell me you didn't just walk out." I turned and looked at them really looked, and I saw how ready they were to explode on my behalf. It would have been easy to let them. It would have felt good for one hot second. But I wasn't raising angry soldiers. I was raising whole adults. I walked out, I said calmly, because I wasn't going to beg. "But she humiliated you," they snapped. "She brought that woman in like you're nothing." I nodded once slow. "I saw it," I said, and I heard it. My other child came in, then hair still damp like they'd rushed from wherever they were. They looked at the box, then at my face, and something flickered hurt, mixed with a kind of helplessness. "So what are we going to do?" they asked. Their voice cracked on the last word, not from fear of the company, but from fear of me being alone in this. I sat down finally, not because I was tired, but because sitting felt like choosing control over collapse. "We're going to do what your stepfather would have wanted," I said. "We're going to let responsibility teach her." Responsibility. My first child scoffed bitter. "Mom, she just fired you." I held their gaze steady, and I felt my own grief sharpen into something clearer. "I helped put her in that seat," I said softly. "I asked the board to give her the chance, not because she deserved it, but because I thought it might change her." The room went quiet, not peaceful, stunned. My second child blinked hard. "You did that?" they whispered. I nodded. "I did," I said. "And that's why I'm not going to fight her with noise. I'm going to watch what she does with what she's been given." My first child shook their head, pacing now, hands on their hair. "She's not going to learn," they said. "She's going to destroy things." I stared down at the box on my table, the things I'd packed in 5 minutes pens, a framed photo, a small notebook, and I realized how quickly a person can be erased if they don't understand the kind of power that doesn't shout. I wanted to believe time would soften Brianna. I wanted to believe grief would make her human again. I wanted to believe giving her responsibility would make her cautious. It didn't. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm the way I always did, because my body didn't know I'd been fired. For decades, my days started with numbers and ended with numbers. And somewhere along the way, I became the kind of woman who could tell if something was wrong in a building just by the way a phone rang. I lay in bed listening to the quiet in my house, the kind of quiet that usually meant peace. But that morning, it felt like being locked outside of a life I'd built with my own hands. I didn't cry. I didn't pray out loud. I just sat up slowly and stared at the edge of the mattress, feeling the weight of all the routines I couldn't perform anymore. Then my phone lit up. Not my children, not a friend checking in the office. A number I recognized without thinking. I watched it ring twice before I answered because part of me wanted to test something. Part of me wanted to see if they would keep calling even after Brianna had made her little announcement in the lobby. Like my service had been fired, but my responsibility hadn't. "Ms. Ward," a voice whispered when I picked up. It wasn't the voice of someone calling to chat. It was tight panic, trying not to be heard. "It's me from vendor relations." I could hear papers shuffling in the background, the soft hum of the office, and beneath it, all the low thread of fear. "I'm not supposed to call you," she added quickly, "but they're asking questions, and I don't know what to say." I closed my eyes and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not surprise. Confirmation. "Slow down," I said, and my voice came out soft but firm. The same tone I used for years when Richard would storm into my office frustrated about a delay he didn't understand. "What questions?" the woman exhaled shakily. "The vendor for the equipment lease," she said. "They called this morning. They said they didn't get the payment confirmation for this month. They're asking who to speak with. Brianna's in a meeting and her mother. She told them she'd call back. Her mother. The way she said it sounded like she wanted to spit." I leaned my head back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling, seeing my old office in my mind like it was still mine. The file cabinet I kept organized. The calendar reminders I set months ahead. The quiet systems nobody noticed because they worked. That's what people never respect about a woman like me. They think because you don't wear your power on your chest, you don't have any. But I wasn't just handling the accounts. I was the spine. I kept payroll moving so people could feed their kids without ever worrying about whether a check would clear. I kept vendors calm so deliveries arrived on time without anyone having to beg. I kept taxes from becoming a crisis, not with fancy words, but with preparation and quiet discipline. When auditors came through people in suits with sharp eyes and tighter smiles, I was the one they asked for because I could answer questions without flinching. I kept the company clean, not perfect. Clean enough to survive storms. Richard used to joke that I ran the place without running the place. He'd say it with pride, like it was a compliment and a secret at the same time. Elena, he'd tell me late at night, you don't just know the numbers, you know the people behind the numbers? And I did. I knew the employee who always asked for a paper check because his bank account wasn't stable yet. I knew the single mother who picked up overtime every holiday because she had a daughter in college. I knew which supplier would panic if you didn't confirm their invoice by noon. I knew which bills had to be paid early and which could wait without consequences. That wasn't just accounting. That was survival knowledge. That was how a small business becomes a company that lasts 30 years. Did she approve payroll? I asked the woman quietly. There was a pause. Too long. She said she'd look at it later, the woman admitted. I felt my jaw tighten. Not because I wanted to control Brianna, but because I could see the future like a chart unfolding. Brianna didn't understand that payroll wasn't a button you pressed. It was trust. It was people's lives held together by a schedule they depended on. Richard had always understood that. Even when he didn't understand the paperwork, he would have never played with that. Listen to me, I told the woman. Don't make promises. Don't argue. Tell them you're escalating the issue and someone will respond today. But Ms. Ward, her voice cracked. They don't know what they're doing. I swallowed the sharpness rising in my throat and kept my tone even. I know, I said. That's why you called. The line went quiet, and I could hear her breathing on the other end, waiting for me to fix it the way I always did. My fingers curled around the phone. Part of me wanted to step back in, walk into that building like nothing had happened, sit in my chair and stabilize everything out of sheer habit. But another part of me, the part that had survived long enough to know when softness becomes danger, understood something new. This was what Brianna wanted. Chaos, then blame. A mess she could point at and say it proved she was right to erase me. I opened my eyes and stared at the light coming through my blinds. I didn't have to guess what would happen. I'd seen this pattern too many times in life. A young person reaches for control without understanding what control costs, and then they panic when reality doesn't bend. The woman on the phone whispered, "What should we do?" I took a slow breath, feeling my grief settle into something sharper than sadness. "For now," I said, "you keep your head down and you do your job and you tell no one you called me." I ended the call and sat there in the quiet, listening to my own heartbeat. Brianna thought she removed me. She didn't understand she removed the systems that kept her standing, and that's why I knew what would happen next. By noon, my phone had turned into a door people kept knocking on even after they were told I no longer live there. The first call came from a vendor who never called me unless something was wrong. The second came from a staff member whose voice was so low I could tell she'd stepped into a hallway just to whisper. The third was a missed call that left no message, and the fourth came with a text that read, "I'm sorry to bother you, but they're saying you didn't leave anything organized." That one sat on my screen like a dare, like a setup. I didn't respond. I stared at it until my eyes burned, because the truth underneath it was what made my stomach twist. Brianna didn't just want me gone. She wanted the story of me to be ugly on the way out. She wanted to erase me and then blame the empty space on my failure. That's how people protect their pride. They rewrite the past so they don't have to face what they broke. I was standing in my kitchen when the phone rang again, and I recognized the number immediately because I had answered it for years. The bank, not my personal bank, the company's contact line. My fingers hovered over the screen before I picked up. I could already hear Richard in my head, that quiet seriousness he got when money and people collided. "Don't let them ruin what we built, Lena." I answered anyway. "Elena Ward," I said. The voice on the other end hesitated, and I heard the shift in tone. Surprise, then relief, then the quick correction of someone remembering rules. "M. Ward," the man said carefully. "I'm calling regarding the account activity. You need to speak to Brianna." I cut in softly, not angry, just firm. There was a pause. "We've attempted." He admitted, "We haven't received a response." My jaw tightened. Not because I wanted to rescue Brianna, because I knew what it meant when the bank started needing confirmations and the person in charge didn't answer. A company can survive a rude CEO. It cannot survive silence with money. "I'm no longer authorized," I said, and I hated how that sentence tasted in my mouth. The man cleared his throat. "Understood," he said then, lowered his voice like he didn't want to be caught being human. "I'm only informing you because this is unusual. There are pending items that require immediate attention." Pending items. Another polite phrase for the wheels are slipping off. I ended the call and leaned both hands on the counter, breathing through my nose. My heart was steady, but my skin felt hot, like my body wanted to move, even though my mind had already decided not to. I could drive down there. I could walk into that building. I could save them from their own incompetence. And if I did, Brianna would smile later and tell everyone she'd been right, that I couldn't let go because I needed to feel important. I wasn't going to hand her that satisfaction. I wiped my hands on a towel that wasn't dirty just to have something to do. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, it was a delivery man holding a clipboard looking mildly irritated, the way people do when they've been made to run errands because someone else can't organize their life. "Package for the office," he said. "They told me to bring it here." I stared at him. "They told you to bring it to my house." He shrugged like he didn't care where it went as long as he got a signature. "They said you handle it," he replied. That sentence hit me harder than any vendor call because it told me something plain and cruel. Even after firing me, Brianna was still using my name to hold things together. She was still leaning on the idea of me while pretending I was disposable. I signed and took the package, then shut the door and stood with it in my arms, feeling insulted in a way that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with disrespect. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a staff member I trusted, someone who had been with the company almost as long as I had. Her message was short. "She's in the conference room telling everyone you left the books a mess." I stared at the screen and something in me went very still. Not anger, calculation. If Brianna could say that out loud, if she could stand in front of grown people and rewrite decades of work in one sentence, then this wasn't just a bad transition. This was a campaign. I pictured her in that conference room, shoulders squared, voice bright, making herself look decisive by painting me as incompetent. I pictured Evelyn Mercer sitting near her, nodding pleased, like she'd finally gotten a front row seat to my humiliation. And in that picture, I finally understood the real danger. It wasn't the missed payments. It wasn't the confused staff. Those could be fixed. The danger was Brianna's need to protect her pride by destroying my credibility. That kind of person doesn't correct mistakes. They bury witnesses. My phone rang again, and I didn't answer. I watched it ring until it stopped, because I needed the silence to hear my own thoughts. Somewhere inside that building, people were panicking. Somewhere inside that building, Brianna was performing leadership while the foundation cracked under her feet. And instead of owning the cracks, she was doing the most predictable thing in the world. She blamed me for problems I no longer touched. That evening, I set 2 plates on my dining table out of habit before I remembered I wasn't feeding a household anymore. The habit embarrassed me more than the loneliness. I stood there looking at the plates like they were evidence of how long I'd been living in service to other people's stability. I put one plate back in the cabinet, then the other, and I leaned my forehead against the cool wood for a second, just long enough to feel the ache behind my eyes without letting it spill. When I turned around, my phone was already lighting up again, but this time it wasn't the office. It was my children. They'd been patient for a day, respectful of my silence, but the kind of love they carried didn't know how to stay quiet when they smelled disrespect. The first call came from my oldest voice, tight, and controlled the way it gets when they're trying not to scare me with their anger. "Mom," they said, "tell me you're not sitting in that house alone pretending this is fine." I exhaled slowly. "I'm not pretending," I said. "I'm breathing." There was a pause, then a sharper voice behind them. My other child, the one who always moved first and asked questions, second. "We're coming over," they said. "Right now." "No," I replied, calm but final. Silence hit the line, then a soft, stunned laugh like they couldn't believe I'd said no to my own protection. "Mom," my oldest said, "she fired you. She brought Evelyn Mercer into your position like you were trash. You can't just, I can." I cut in. Not loud, but firm enough to stop them. And I did. 10 minutes later, they showed up anyway because I raised them with backbone, and they didn't know how to watch their mother be mistreated from a distance. They walked in with that energy people carry when they want to fight on your behalf. Coat still on keys, still in hand eyes scanning my face for damage they could name. I watched them quietly, letting them see that I was standing, that I was intact. Not because I felt intact, but because I needed them to understand this wasn't going to turn into a family war. "Tell us what you need," my oldest said, pulling out a chair like they were preparing for a strategy meeting. "Say the word." "I need you to sit," I told them. They sat, both of them, but their bodies stayed tense. Shoulders, lifted hands, restless. My youngest leaned forward. "We can talk to the board," they said. "We can bring in an attorney. We can—" "No," I repeated. And this time I softened it with a small shake of my head. The way you soften a door closing so it doesn't sound like punishment. "I'm not putting you in the middle." My oldest frowned. "Why not?" They asked, voice low. "You have a right to protect yourself." I held their gaze and felt the difference between their generation and mine in that moment. They were used to speaking up, taking space, demanding fairness. I'd learned to survive in rooms where fairness wasn't offered and dignity had to be carried like a weapon you never swung until it counted. Because I said, choosing my words carefully, "This company isn't your inheritance." My youngest blinked. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about principles," I replied. "I'm talking about what kind of woman I want to be when this is over." They stared at me like they expected me to explain more, but I didn't. Instead, I stood and walked to the window, looking out at my yard, as if I could see Richard out there, hands in his pockets, telling me not to let anger drive the car. "I could have pushed you into that company years ago," I said, not turning around. "I could have put your names on paper. I could have set you up to take it over one day, but I didn't." Why, my oldest asked, and I heard something like hurt in their voice. Not because they wanted the company, but because they wanted to understand why I'd chosen struggle when I had options. I turned back. "Because you built your own lives," I said, "and I'm proud of that. You have your careers, your reputations, your peace. You're not going to lose sleep over payroll deadlines or sit in meetings with people who smile at you while sharpening a knife behind their back. My youngest scoffed softly. So you're just going to let her destroy everything they asked? The heat in their voice was real. I walked back to the table and placed my palms flat on the wood, leaning forward slightly. No, I said, and for the first time that night, my voice carried something sharper than grief. I'm not going to let her destroy anything. My oldest eyes narrowed. Then let us help. I shook my head again. If you step in, I said quietly, it becomes a family brawl. It becomes Elena's kids versus Richard's daughter, and people will pick sides based on blood, not truth. I'm not giving Brianna that excuse. My youngest opened their mouth to argue, then closed it because they heard the logic even if they didn't like it. I reached across the table and touched their hand, lightly grounding them the way I used to when they were little and scared. You didn't ask for this, I told them, and you're not carrying it. My oldest sat back slowly, eyes studying me, like they were finally seeing something new. So what are you going to do? They asked. I inhaled, feeling my own grief settle into a colder place inside me. Not dead, not gone, just disciplined. I didn't want power. I didn't want a throne. I wanted stability. I wanted to protect the people who didn't deserve to be caught in Brianna's tantrum, dressed up as leadership. I looked at my children and saw how ready they were to burn the world down for me. And I felt love so deep, it almost hurt. Then I made the only decision that matched the woman I'd always been. You're going to go home, I said, and you're going to stay out of this. My youngest's eyes widened. And you? I paused because the next part had weight, not because I was afraid, because once I said it, I couldn't pretend anymore. I'm going to handle it, I said, the right way. My oldest nodded slowly, still angry but respecting the line I'd drawn. Who's going to help you? They asked, voice quieter now. I held the silence for a beat, letting them feel the gravity of what I was about to choose. Then I said it plainly, without drama. There's only one person, I replied, and I felt my spine straighten as I spoke. So there was only one person left. After my children left the house, held their anger like heat trapped in the walls. I walked through the rooms, turning off lights that were already off, straightening pillows that didn't need straightening, moving like a woman trying to keep her hands busy so her mind wouldn't go somewhere dark. Outside, the street was quiet, but inside me, the noise kept building. Not loud like panic, sharp like a needle. I kept seeing the lobby doors opening, Evelyn Mercer walking in like she'd been invited to reclaim something. Brianna standing beside her like she'd finally placed the right picture in the right frame. That image wouldn't loosen its grip on my chest. It wasn't just disrespect, it was intent. And intent is what makes a situation dangerous because intent doesn't correct itself. It doubles down. My phone buzzed again, and this time I didn't even look at the name before I answered. M. Ward, a man said, voice strained. It's shipping. We've got a problem. I sat down slowly at the edge of my couch. The way you sit when you already know you're about to hear something you don't want. Talk to me, I said. He swallowed audibly. A shipment is being held. They're saying they never got the confirmation they always get. I went to Brianna and she told me to speak with her mother. Her mother told me to wait. Wait. That word again. I closed my eyes. People who don't understand systems always think delays are harmless. They don't realize delay is how small problems become expensive problems. Did you tell them it would be handled today? I asked. I tried, he said quickly. But Brianna snapped at me in front of everyone. She said, "We're cleaning up Elena's mess, so be patient." The sentence hit me like a hand across the face, not because it hurt, but because it confirmed what I'd been trying not to admit. This wasn't a shaky start. This was Brianna building a story, one where she was brave and I was incompetent, one where her mother was the solution and I was the stain. And if she could say that in public, she could do worse in private. "Thank you," I told him. "Don't argue with her. Do your job. I'll handle what I can handle." I hung up and sat there staring at the dark TV screen, seeing my own reflection like a stranger. My life had been built on restraint, on knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the work. But silence was only power when the person on the other side had boundaries. Brianna didn't. She had appetite. She had grief twisted into entitlement. And now she had authority the board handed her. And she was using it like a weapon, not a responsibility. I walked into my bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser, the one I didn't open often. Inside was a simple folder, not fancy, not labeled, just thick enough to feel like weight. Richard had told me once years ago, "If anything happens to me, you know what to do." He didn't say it dramatically. He said it like he was telling me where the extra batteries were. At the time, I had hated that conversation. I had hated the way death tried to enter our marriage even when he survived. But I had listened because listening was love, when you were married to a man who built everything with his hands and trusted you with what he couldn't hold forever. I carried the folder to the dining table and sat down. The house was silent, but my mind wasn't. I thought about payroll, about the woman who whispered apologies to me in the hallway, about the man in shipping being humiliated for asking the right questions, about Howard Ellison standing stiff in the lobby, caught between partnership and politics. I thought about the board, all those careful faces watching me when they appointed Brianna, relieved to have a story that sounded simple. Founder's daughter steps up. Stepmother supports. Company moves on. They didn't know that stories like this don't move on. They break. My fingers rested on the folder and I felt that old resistance rise in me. The part that didn't want to be the woman who pulls documents out like a threat. I didn't want this kind of power. I didn't want to win anything. I wanted peace. I wanted Richard back. But I couldn't trade the company's survival for my comfort. And I couldn't let Brianna's pride burn through 30 years of work just because she needed to punish someone who didn't deserve it. I reached for my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in months. A number saved under a name that always made my stomach tighten, the company attorney. My thumb hovered over it for a moment. Not because I was unsure, but because once I pressed call, the story would shift permanently. This would stop being about a grieving family trying to adjust. It would become about control, about truth, about consequences. I pressed call. It rang twice, then a voice answered, calm and professional. "This is the firm," he said. I swallowed once and kept my tone steady. "It's Elena Ward," I replied. "I need to set a meeting first thing Monday morning." There was a pause, subtle, like he understood immediately that this wasn't a casual request. "Is this urgent?" he asked. I glanced down at the folder on my table and felt my spine settle into place. "Yes," I said quietly. "It's urgent." He didn't ask questions over the phone. He didn't push. He simply said, "Monday at 8:30, I'll come to the office." When the call ended, I sat there in the quiet, my hand still resting on the folder, feeling a strange calm slide over me like armor. Not relief, not triumph, resolve. Brianna thought she was in control because she'd fired me and paraded her mother through my workplace. She thought the company belonged to her because the board gave her a title and people clapped politely. She didn't know that Monday was already set. She didn't know who would walk through those doors first. She had no idea who was coming. Monday came in dressed like nothing happened, bright and ordinary. The kind of morning that makes you feel crazy for carrying grief and betrayal in your chest, while the world keeps acting casual. I woke before dawn and sat at my kitchen table with the folder in front of me unopened. Not because I didn't know what was inside, but because I needed my hands to stay calm. I didn't drink coffee. I didn't pace. I watched the light creep across my floor and listened to my own breathing like it was a metronome I had to keep steady. By 7:30, I was fully dressed, not in black, not in mourning, in something clean and quiet, the kind of outfit a woman wears when she's done being handled. I drove to the office and parked farther away than I used to, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't want to arrive like I belonged there yet. Not until the moment was right. The building looked the same from the outside, glass steel, neatly trimmed shrubs. But inside, I could already feel the unease like a current. The lobby was busy in a shallow way. People moved quickly, eyes forward, voices lowered. A few heads turned when I walked in, then turned away just as fast. Like looking at me too long would make them guilty by association. I didn't stop. I didn't ask permission. I walked straight toward the conference room where the board meetings always happened, my heels tapping out a rhythm that reminded me of all the mornings I arrived early to fix problems nobody knew existed. The room wasn't locked. It never was, because the company had always been built on the idea that trust was stronger than control. That was Richard's pride. He believed if you treated people like they mattered, they'd protect what you built. Brianna was about to learn how expensive that belief could be. I stepped inside and set my folder at the far end of the table. Then I stood by the window and looked out at the parking lot, letting my face stay neutral. I could hear voices in the hallway, the soft scrape of chairs, the click of heels, the murmur of morning plans. Every sound felt sharpened, because my body understood something my mind refused to name. Today was a turning point. Outside cars pulled in one after another. Then I saw Brianna's car, sleek clean, moving with the kind of certainty young people carry when they think they've already won. She stepped out wearing a fitted suit, hair-perfect sunglasses on, like she was walking into a photo shoot, not a company she'd thrown into confusion for the sake of revenge. She didn't look around like someone checking on her people. She looked around like someone checking who was watching. She headed toward the entrance, with her chin-lifted phone in hand, speaking into it with a bright laugh that didn't belong in a building still hanging Richard's memorial photo in the lobby. Behind her, another car parked, and Evelyn Mercer stepped out like she'd been waiting all weekend to arrive. Evelyn's outfit was polished, purposeful, the kind of clothing that says, "I have a right to be here." She carried a handbag tucked tight under her arm and a folder of her own, as if she thought papers alone made her qualified. The two of them walked in together, mother and daughter, framed by glass doors, and the sight hit me in a strange place between anger and pity. Not because they looked powerful, because they looked hungry. Evelyn walked slightly behind Brianna, but not in a submissive way. In a claiming way, like she was letting her daughter take the first bite while she waited for her share. Staff greeted Brianna with polite energy that didn't reach their eyes. "Good morning, Miss Ward," someone said, and Brianna responded with a smile and a nod, not stopping, not asking names, not slowing down to see who looked nervous. She went straight toward the main hallway, and Evelyn peeled off toward the accounting area, stopping near my old office like she was checking her territory. I watched through the glass window as she walked into the space that used to be mine, looked at the desk, then at the file cabinet, then at the shelves like she was measuring what she'd inherited. A staff member hovered near the doorway with a notebook waiting for instruction, and Evelyn waved her off with a casual flick of her hand that made the woman shrink. Brianna walked into the conference room next, and when she saw me standing there, something flickered across her face. Surprise, first sharp and quick, then a smooth mask sliding down over it. Elena! She said, voice bright, like this was friendly, like she hadn't called me a burden 4 days after burying my husband. I didn't expect to see you. I'm here for the meeting, I replied evenly. I didn't offer more. I didn't explain. I let the silence do what it always did. Force the other person to fill the space with their own assumptions. Brianna's eyes narrowed slightly, and I could see her mind moving fast, trying to decide whether my presence was a threat or a plea. She chose arrogance. Well, she said lightly, moving to the head of the table. We can keep this short. I've got a full schedule today. She sat down in Richard's chair like it was a birthright. The chair looked wrong under her, not because she was too young, because she hadn't earned the weight of it. The staff members who filtered in sat quietly, eyes darting between us, tension humming under their polite faces. Howard Ellison arrived last, stepping in with his jaw tight, nodding once at me, then sitting near the middle of the table like a man trying to stay neutral while the ground shifted beneath him. Brianna began speaking about restructuring efficiency moving forward. Words that sounded like something she downloaded from a corporate speech generator, empty and shiny. I watched hands fidget. I watched glances exchange. I watched the room's discomfort grow because everyone could feel that what she was saying didn't match what was happening. Evelyn slipped in a few minutes later and took a seat close to Brianna, leaning in to whisper something that made Brianna's mouth lift in a satisfied smile. That smile landed on me like insult, and still I said nothing. I kept my face calm and my breathing steady because the moment wasn't mine to announce. It was mine to witness. The hallway outside the conference room went quiet as if the building itself was holding its breath. Then the door opened, and a man in a tailored suit stepped in with a leather briefcase in his hand, calm and unhurried. Brianna turned her head sharply, irritation already forming on her face, until she recognized him. The color drained from her cheeks so fast it looked like the room had pulled it out of her. The attorney walked in. The attorney didn't greet the room the way people greet a family business. He didn't soften his steps, didn't offer condolences, didn't smile to ease the tension. He walked in like a man who had already seen the papers and already decided what mattered. The kind of calm that doesn't come from confidence, it comes from authority. Brianna stared at him for a beat too long. The way people stare when they're trying to remember whether they've ever been rude to you before. Evelyn's posture stiffened beside her shoulders, lifting slightly as if she was preparing to argue with someone she thought she could intimidate. Howard Ellison's eyes narrowed, not in anger, in focus. The attorney set his briefcase on the table without asking permission, then glanced around the room once quick and assessing. "Good morning," he said. His voice was level, not loud, but it cut through the air like a blade because it wasn't looking for approval. Brianna forced a laugh that sounded thin. "I wasn't expecting legal counsel this early," she said, trying to make it sound like inconvenience instead of panic. The attorney didn't react to her tone. He unlatched the briefcase slowly, methodically, like he wanted everyone to watch the process. The room stayed so quiet. I could hear the soft click of the metal clasp. Then he pulled out a slim binder and placed it on the table in front of him. Not in front of Brianna in the center, like he was reminding the room that the truth wasn't owned by whoever sat at the head of the table. Before any operational decisions are confirmed, he said there are governance matters that must be clarified. Brianna's smile held, but her eyes tightened. "We've already clarified leadership," she replied, voice sweet with impatience. "The board appointed me." She gestured lightly like she expected nods. Nobody moved. The attorney turned his head slightly toward her, then back toward the binder. "The board appointed you to an executive role," he said, careful. "That does not override shareholder control." The word shareholder landed heavy. Evelyn's lips parted like she was about to speak, then closed again when she realized the room wasn't looking at her. Brianna leaned forward. "My father was the majority owner," she said quickly. "That's why I'm here." Her voice sharpened on the last part as if saying it harder would make it true. I watched the small tremor in her fingers as she touched the edge of the table. She was trying to look steady, but her body had already recognized something dangerous. The attorney opened the binder and flipped to the first page with a smooth motion. No rushing, no drama, just procedure. Mr. Richard Ward founded this company with Mr. Howard Ellison, he said, nodding once toward Howard. Howard's jaw tightened at hearing his name spoken like a footnote. "Mr. Ellison holds 10%, the attorney continued. Howard didn't argue because it was true. It was always true." The attorney's finger tapped the page lightly, then moved. "The remaining shares," he said, "are controlled by Elena Ward." The room didn't react at first. It's strange how shock behaves. Sometimes people don't gasp. Sometimes their faces don't change. Sometimes their bodies simply freeze because their minds are trying to catch up. Brianna blinked once slow, like she thought she misheard him. Evelyn's head snapped slightly toward me, eyes widening for the first time. Howard's stare flicked to me, sharp searching, as if he was rereading every memory he had of me in real time. Brianna let out a small laugh that came out wrong. "That's not possible," she said, but the confidence wasn't there anymore. It sounded like a child denying a teacher. The attorney turned the binder so the page faced the room, then slid it forward. "Shareholder ledger," he said simply. "Updated and maintained under legal supervision." Brianna leaned in her eyes, scanning. Like if she looked hard enough, the words would rearrange themselves. "No," she whispered then louder. "No, my father, your father," the attorney interrupted gently, "made a series of estate and governance decisions after a serious health crisis." Brianna's head lifted, eyes darting. "What crisis?" she snapped. And the question wasn't about business. It was about exclusion, about being left out of something her father chose not to trust her with. The attorney didn't take the bait. He flipped a page, then another. "Approximately 12 to 15 years ago," he said, "Mr. Ward transferred controlling shares to Mrs. Elena Ward through a protected structure designed to keep the company stable in the event of his death. The language was careful, but the meaning was brutal. Richard had prepared for Brianna. Richard had protected the company from Brianna." Brianna's breathing turned shallow. Evelyn's face hardened, and I saw the humiliation rise in her like heat. She shifted closer to her daughter, as if closeness could shield her from the embarrassment of realizing she had walked into a building she didn't own. This is some kind of trick," Brianna said, voice rising. She looked around the table, searching for allies. Nobody moved. The board chair wasn't there, but the weight of the company was. Howard's voice came out, low controlled. "Is it true?" he asked me. The room tilted toward me, waiting hungry. I could feel their eyes pulling at my face, demanding reaction. I didn't give them much. I kept my hands folded in front of me and met Howard's gaze steadily. "It's true," I said. 2 words, no speech, no victory, just confirmation. Brianna's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, and the sound that came out wasn't a sentence. It was a breath, like she'd been punched. The attorney turned one more page and tapped the bottom line with his pen. Controlling interest, he said, voice calm, 65%. Brianna's eyes dropped to the number, and for the first time since Richard died, her face wasn't performing. It was raw. The entitlement, the confidence, the hunger, all of it had nowhere to stand. She stared at the ledger like it was a death certificate with her name on it. Then she looked up at me, and something shifted behind her eyes. Something cold and disbelieving. Her face changed. For a moment after the number was spoken, the conference room felt like it had been vacuum sealed. Not a dramatic silence. Worse, a working silence. The kind where everyone is listening for what happens next because the old rules just died and the new rules haven't been announced yet. Brianna sat at the head of the table with her hands flat on the wood, eyes fixed on the ledger like she was waiting for it to blink and correct itself. Evelyn leaned in close, whispering something sharp in her ear, but Brianna didn't even turn her head. It was like her body had gone somewhere else to survive. The attorney closed the binder softly as if ending a conversation and looked around the room. Now that ownership has been clarified, he said, we need to correct actions taken under an assumption of authority. Brianna's head snapped up. Assumption, she repeated, voice thin, offended by the word like it was a personal insult. I was appointed CEO. You were appointed, the attorney agreed, calm by a board acting under incomplete information. His eyes shifted just briefly toward the empty chair where the board chair usually sat. Those appointments are subject to shareholder confirmation. The air tightened again. I watched Howard Ellison's hands clasp and unclasp once, the only sign that he felt any of this deeply. He had built this company too, even with 10%, and now he was watching the founder's daughter discover. She'd been holding a title without a handle. Brianna tried to recover with posture first. She pushed her shoulders back, lifted her chin, and forced her voice into a brighter register. This is ridiculous, she said, turning to the room like she was addressing her employees instead of the truth. My father would never. She stopped mid-sentence because the attorney raised one finger. Not rude, just final. Your father did, he said quietly. That sentence landed harder than the ledger. It stripped away her fantasy. It made it plain. Richard Ward had chosen this on purpose. Brianna's mouth tightened. Her eyes flashed toward me sharp with something that finally looked honest. So what now? She asked. The question sounded like a challenge, but it was fear wearing makeup. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't need to. Power doesn't rush to speak. Power waits because it knows the room will eventually lean toward it. The attorney reached for his phone, tapped the screen once, and set it on speaker. We have the board chair on the line, he said, and the room's attention shifted instantly because people respect voices that arrive through official channels. A man's voice filled the air, controlled and clipped. I'm on, he said. Counsel, proceed. The attorney spoke like he was reading from a reality that couldn't be negotiated. He summarized the facts not with drama, but with the kind of careful clarity that leaves no room for spinning. When he finished, there was a brief pause on the line, and then the board chair exhaled. Mrs. Ward, he said, addressing me now. I was not aware of the controlling shares. You weren't meant to be, I replied quietly. Not accusing, not defensive, just true. Brianna flinched at that, and I saw it. The humiliation of realizing she wasn't the only one kept out. The board chair continued, voice tightening. Given this new information, the appointment of Ms. Brianna Ward as CEO must be reviewed immediately. Brianna straightened. Reviewed? She repeated, and her voice cracked on the last syllable. She looked around the table, searching for someone to rescue her. Evelyn's face was rigid, lips pressed tight like she was holding back poison. Howard's eyes stayed on the table. Staff members sat frozen. No one wanted to be the first to speak for her now that the ground had moved. The board chair's tone sharpened. "This is not a punishment," he said, but it sounded like one anyway. "It is governance. Is." Effective immediately, Ms. Ward's executive authority is suspended pending formal confirmation by the controlling shareholder. The words were clean corporate cold, but what they meant was simple. Brianna's power was gone. She opened her mouth, ready to fight, and Evelyn leaned forward as if she was about to jump into the space and become the mouthpiece. But the attorney spoke again calmly, as if he was cutting a string before it could tangle. Additionally, he said, "The termination of Elena Ward is invalid under these circumstances. Miss Ward was removed under an executive action that is now suspended. Any records of her dismissal will be corrected." Evelyn's head snapped toward him. "Corrected?" She snapped, finally unable to hold her silence. "You can't just—" "We can," the attorney replied, still calm. And that calm was louder than her anger. "And we will." Brianna's eyes widened. She stared at the attorney, then at the board chair's empty seat, then at Howard, then at me. Her face changed again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was the realization that she wasn't in a family argument anymore. She was in a structure, and the structure didn't care about her feelings. I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not joy, just a quiet, settling, a line being redrawn where it always should have been. I leaned forward slightly, not to threaten, but to anchor the room. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," I said, and my voice sounded older than grief now. "I'm here to protect the company Richard built, the employees, the obligations, the stability." Brianna swallowed hard. Her throat worked like she was forcing back words that didn't know where to go. She looked like she wanted to say she was sorry. She looked like she wanted to scream. She looked like she wanted to blame me for a choice her father made years ago. Instead, she sat there with her hands on the table, eyes glassy but dry, and did something I didn't expect. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She didn't apologize. She didn't even try to spin it. She just stared ahead like her mind was rebooting, and the room watched her like she was a stranger. When the board chair ended the call, the attorney gathered his binder and stood signaling the meeting was over. Chairs scraped. People rose slowly, unsure whether to look at Brianna or pretend she wasn't there. Evelyn stood too, lips tight, eyes burning, but she didn't speak again. Brianna remained seated still at the head of the table, but the chair no longer fit her. She looked at me once, one quick cutting glance, and then her gaze dropped to the table like she couldn't hold it. Her mouth stayed closed. No apology, no explanation, nothing. She didn't say a word. By the time I walked out of the conference room, the building felt like it had been rearranged without anyone moving a single piece of furniture. People stood in small clusters pretending to talk about work, but their eyes kept flicking toward doors, toward corners, toward anything that might signal where Brianna had gone. There's a particular kind of tension that comes after a public correction when everyone knows the truth has been spoken, but nobody knows what the person who lost power will do next. I could feel it in the way the receptionist kept smoothing the same stack of papers, in the way a manager's laugh sounded too high, in the way Evelyn Mercer walked through the hallway without speaking to anyone, her face hard and forward, like she was leaving a fire. She started. Brianna wasn't behind her. Brianna didn't storm out. She didn't slam a door. She didn't even do the dramatic thing people expect. She vanished. One moment, she was sitting in Richard's chair with her hands flat on the table, and the next moment, she was gone so fast it was as if she had slipped through the building's walls. I asked no one where she went. I didn't chase. Chasing is what people like Brianna want. Chasing turns their shame into your desperation. Instead, I stepped into my old office and closed the door gently behind me. The room smelled the same. Paper-faint coffee, the quiet, familiar scent of work that has been done consistently for years. My desk was cleared in a way that wasn't clean. It was angry. Someone had moved my chair. My pens were gone. The framed picture of Richard and me that used to sit on the corner had been turned face down. I stared at it for a beat longer than I meant to, feeling something sharp slide under my ribs. It wasn't grief, not exactly. Grief was already in me, like blood. This was something else, a deliberate cruelty, small enough to deny, clear enough to sting. I picked the frame up and turned it over. Richard smiled out of the photo, his arm around my shoulder, his eyes soft with that steady trust he gave me when he was tired. I set the picture upright again, right where it belonged. Then I sat in my chair and opened my notebook not to plan revenge, but to stabilize the building. That's what I had always done. The first hour passed with a steady stream of people knocking softly and stepping in like they didn't know if they were allowed. A staff member from payroll came in, first eyes red, clutching a folder like a shield. "Miss Ward," she whispered, Are we okay?" Her voice cracked on. "Okay." I nodded. "You're okay," I said. "Payroll will be handled. Nobody's check is getting touched." Her shoulders dropped like I had loosened a rope around her neck. Next came the shipping supervisor, the one Brianna humiliated. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked tired. The way men look when they've been forced to swallow disrespect because they have a family depending on their paycheck. "I'm sorry," he said, and it wasn't even clear what he was apologizing for. "You don't owe me." "Sorry," I told him. "You owe your work. Keep doing it." He nodded and left, and I watched him go with a quiet ache in my chest. I didn't take pleasure in Brianna being corrected. I took no pleasure in any of this. I wanted to grieve my husband. I wanted to sit in my house and let the world slow down long enough for my heart to catch up. But Brianna had forced a different kind of pace, and now the company needed stability more than it needed emotion. Around noon, Howard Ellison came to my door. He stood in the frame for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking at my office like he wasn't sure if he was seeing the real thing or a new version of the company he didn't recognize. "You could have told me," he said quietly. Not accusing, not friendly, just honest. I didn't flinch. "Richard didn't want noise," I replied, and I honored that. Howard's mouth tightened. He nodded slowly like a man swallowing pride. "Well," he said, "it's noise now." Yes, I agreed, and that's why I'm here. Howard lingered another second. Then his eyes slid to the picture frame on my desk, and something softened in his expression. He didn't say Richard's name. He just nodded once and left. After he went, the quiet in my office deepened. The building kept moving outside, but inside my room, the silence felt heavy, like it was waiting for something human to happen. An apology, a knock of voice cracked with regret. I told myself Brianna would come. I told myself once the shock wore off, she would at least send a message. Not because she cared about me, but because she would want to salvage her dignity. She didn't. No email, no call, no assistant hovering with an awkward request. Nothing. It was as if she had cut herself out of the story entirely, rather than admit she had been wrong. Evelyn didn't return either. She didn't come to collect her things. She didn't ask for a meeting. She didn't offer a single polite word. That absence told me more than their insults had, because insults can be fueled by emotion. Silence like this is fueled by truth. That night, when I finally left the office, the sky was already dark, and my body felt older than it had a week ago. I drove home with both hands tight on the steering wheel, thinking about how strange it was that Brianna could carry so much hatred without ever showing it until she had a title to hide behind. When I walked into my house, my phone buzzed again. This time, not a vendor, not staff, not the bank, my son. I answered, expecting his usual protective anger. His voice was different. Lower, careful. "Mom," he said, "I need to tell you something." I froze in my hallway keys still in my hand because I could hear it in his tone. The sound of information that changes how you see the past. "What is it?" I asked softly. He exhaled once like he was bracing himself. "Someone called me today," he said, and what he said about Brianna. He stopped, and the silence on the line felt like a warning. Then my son told me something. I didn't take my coat off. I didn't sit down. I stood in my hallway with my keys still in my hand, listening to my son breathe on the other end of the line, like he was trying to choose the safest way to drop something heavy. "Who called you?" I asked, and my voice came out low controlled, but I felt my heartbeat thudding in my throat. My son hesitated. "It was a man I know," he said. "A friend. He used to work with me a while back. He also used to be close to Brianna." The way he said close told me enough. My stomach tightened. "Her fiancé?" I said, not as a question, just a landing. "Yeah," my son replied, and there was a grimness in his tone. "They've been broken up for a while before all this company mess even started. But he heard what happened. He heard she fired you. He heard Evelyn was walking around like she owned the place. And he said he couldn't keep quiet anymore." I closed my eyes and leaned my shoulder against the wall. I didn't want more information, not because I was afraid of it, but because information has a way of changing the past. Retroactively. It makes you replay years with a different lens. "Put him on," I said. My son exhaled like he'd been hoping I wouldn't ask. Then the line shifted, and a new voice came through. Male, measured, not dramatic. The voice of someone who had practiced being calm because he'd spent time around Brianna's storms. "Mrs. Ward," he said. He didn't sound friendly. He sounded respectful and tired. "I know you don't know me well," he continued, "but I need you to hear this from someone who saw it up close." I didn't soften. "Say what you came to say," I replied. Silence held for a beat. Then he spoke. "Brianna didn't fire you because of work," he said quietly. "She fired you because she's been waiting to." My fingers tightened around my keys until the metal bit into my palm. "Waiting," I repeated, and the word tasted bitter. "Since when?" He let out a slow breath. "Since the day her father married you," he answered. The sentence didn't hit me like shock. It hit me like recognition. Not full recognition, because Brianna had always smiled in my face, always played sweet, always said the right things in public, but deep recognition, the kind that makes you realize your instincts were whispering warnings the whole time, and you kept telling them to hush. "She told you that?" I asked. "Not in one big confession," he said. "That's not how she talks. She drops it in pieces, little jokes, little comments, little moments where she thinks she's being clever." I pictured Brianna at family dinners laughing a little too loud at things that weren't funny, correcting her father's stories like she needed to own his memories, watching me the way people watch someone sitting in their seat. I remembered the way she used to call me Elena, instead of Mom, even after Richard asked her gently to try. I remembered how she always hugged me with her arms, but never with her eyes. The man's voice continued, steady. She believes you replaced her mother, he said. She believes you took her father away from her, and she never forgave you for it. My throat tightened. I never took anything. I said softly, and my voice cracked just slightly on the last word, not because I was pleading for sympathy, but because the injustice of it was sharp. I added quieter. I tried to love her. I know, he said. And that was what made my chest ache, because he didn't argue. He didn't dismiss it. He acknowledged it like he'd seen it. That's part of what made her angrier. He continued, because it messed up the story she wanted to tell herself. I blinked hard. What story? That you were the villain, he replied. That you came in and stole what belonged to her and her mother. That her father chose you because you were some kind of trophy, some kind of mistake. My jaw clenched. Richard had loved me with the kind of steady, ordinary love that built a life. No trophy, no mistake. We'd built a company, a home stability. But Brianna needed a villain. People like her always do, so she punishes you, the man said, voice lowering. But she does it politely. She smiles, she plays nice. She waits until she has leverage. My son's breathing came through faintly on the line, angry and controlled, like he wanted to jump in and curse. I kept him silent by staying calm. And the firing. I asked, forcing myself to keep it clean. The man exhaled. That was her moment, he said. She told me once after a fight that if she ever got real power in that company, she'd clean house. And she didn't mean the books. My stomach rolled. She meant me, I said. Yes, he replied. She meant you. I stared at the wall in front of me and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Not rage, not heartbreak, understanding. She wanted to replace you with Evelyn, he added. And I heard the disgust in his voice, now the first crack of emotion. Because it wasn't about competence, it was about undoing you, making you small, making you feel like you never belonged. I swallowed. Images flashed through my mind. Brianna calling me a burden. Brianna parading Evelyn through the lobby. Brianna flipping my picture frame face down. They weren't separate incidents. They were one message delivered in different forms. You are not family. You are not permanent. You can be removed. My son spoke then, voice tight. Why are you telling us now? The man paused, because he said quietly, I know what she's capable of when she feels embarrassed, and right now she's embarrassed. The word embarrassed hung in the air like smoke. I opened my eyes and my reflection in the hallway mirror looked older than it had an hour ago. Not because I was broken, because something in me had shifted into clarity. I breathed in, slowly feeling the sting in my palm from the keys I'd been gripping like a weapon. Thank you, I said, and my voice was steady again. You've done what you came to do. The man hesitated, as if he wanted to say more. Then he spoke one last sentence, low and careful. Mrs. Ward. He said, he didn't hate you because you hurt her. She hated you because you survived being good to her. The line went quiet after that, and I stood in my hallway listening to the silence, feeling every memory rearrange itself without mercy. Brianna's smile, Brianna's politeness, Brianna's sweetness. It all had teeth. And for the first time since Richard died, something inside me stopped hoping Brianna would become the woman I pretended she was. I finally understood. The morning after that call, I didn't feel victorious. I felt responsible in the way you feel responsible when a child breaks a glass in your kitchen and walks away like it didn't happen. You're not even mad anymore. You're just tired because you know if you don't pick up the pieces, someone innocent will get cut. I drove to the office early, not because I wanted to prove a point, but because the company couldn't afford another day of confusion. The lobby smelled faintly of cleaning solution, like someone had tried to scrub the tension out overnight. It didn't work. People were already there, moving quietly, shoulders, tight eyes, flicking up when they heard my steps, not in admiration, in relief. Relief is not praise. Relief is desperation softened by hope. I nodded to the receptionist who looked like she hadn't slept. "Good morning," I said simply. Her mouth opened like she wanted to say something bigger, something grateful, but she only managed. "Morning, Ms. Ward," and her voice trembled on the title like she didn't know what to call me anymore. I didn't correct her. Labels were not the point. Stability was. In the conference room, the attorney was already waiting with Howard Ellison. Howard stood by the window staring out at the parking lot like a man watching weather. He couldn't control. When he turned to face me, his eyes held something new, weariness mixed with respect. Not because I had power, but because he realized I had always been holding the company up while staying invisible. "We need a clear interim plan," the attorney said, immediately businesslike. I nodded. "I'm not interested in theatrics," I replied. "I'm interested in people getting paid and vendors getting answered." Howard's mouth tightened in what might have been agreement. "The floor has been shaky," he admitted quietly. "People are nervous." "Then we make it steady," I said. No speech, no emotion floated. Action. We spent the next hour creating what the board should have done before handing Brianna a title with no supervision. Clear authority lines, temporary approvals, a simple message to staff that didn't insult anyone and didn't pretend nothing happened. When it was time to address the employees, I didn't call a big meeting in the lobby. I didn't want a stage. I stood in the main hallway where people could hear me without being forced to gather like an audience. Howard stood a few feet behind me, arms folded, the attorney nearby with his briefcase closed, watching. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I kept my tone calm and practical. "I know the last week has been confusing," I said. "I'm not going to rehash it. Here's what you need to know. Your pay is secure, your work matters, and your questions will be answered." A few shoulders dropped. A few faces softened. Somebody exhaled hard like they'd been holding their breath for days. "If you have a concern," I added, "bring it to your manager. If it's urgent, it comes to me." I didn't say my title. I didn't need to. People who do the real work recognize real authority by how it shows up. After that, I went straight into the mess. Not loudly, quietly. I sat with the payroll team first and confirmed deadlines with the kind of steady detail that calms panic. I spoke to shipping and apologized for how he'd been spoken to, but I did it in a way that didn't make him feel like a victim. "You did your job," I told him. "Keep doing it." I called the vendor who'd been left hanging and handled the situation with the same simple firmness I'd used for years. No excuses, clear commitments, clean follow-through. I didn't mention Brianna. I didn't mention Evelyn. I didn't give anybody a villain to gossip about. Gossip is what weak leadership feeds. Strong leadership starves it. By midday, the building's energy shifted slightly, not into happiness, but into function. People returned to their desks without looking over their shoulders every 5 minutes. The phone stopped sounding like alarms. The small crises stopped multiplying. It wasn't magic. It was discipline. Around 2, I walked past my old office and noticed something on the floor near the trash can. My pens, the ones that had been missing, tossed like they were worthless. I crouched, picked them up, and set them neatly back in the cup on my desk. That small act hit me harder than I expected, because it wasn't about pens. It was about how Brianna wanted me to feel erased. I wasn't going to be erased. Not loudly, not with a fight, with presence, with order, with a steady refusal to disappear. Howard appeared in my doorway later, quiet. "She's not answering the board's calls," he said. I looked up from the paperwork I was reviewing. Brianna. I asked, though I already knew. Howard nodded once, and Evelyn cleared her things out. Left fast. I felt a brief twist in my stomach. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. People who perform power panic when the spotlight turns, they run, they hide, they wait for the world to forget. I didn't say any of that out loud, I simply nodded. "Let them," I said. Howard studied me for a moment, then asked the question I knew was coming sooner or later. "Are you going to take the CEO's seat?" His tone wasn't curious. It was cautious, like he didn't want another war. I stared at my desk at the numbers and schedules and notes that were suddenly mine to hold publicly. "I'm going to take responsibility," I answered. "Titles can come later." Howard exhaled slowly, and I saw his shoulders drop a fraction. "You're not going to celebrate," he said, almost like he was surprised. I looked up at him, and my voice came out quiet and certain. "There's nothing to celebrate," I said. "A man is dead, a company is bruised, a family is broken." Howard's eyes shifted and he nodded once like he couldn't argue with the truth. He left, and I sat alone in my office for a moment, listening to the building working again. My grief was still there, heavy and real, but underneath it was something steadier now. Purpose, not revenge. Duty. I picked up my pen and returned to the work, because that was what Richard built, and that was what I protected. Power doesn't announce itself. The first time I sat in Richard's chair after the building settled, it wasn't dramatic. There were no claps, no whispered congratulations, no moment where the sunlight hit me like a movie scene. It was late. The kind of late where the hallways stop echoing and the only sound left is the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant click of a cleaner cart rolling past. I sat down slowly, not because I was savoring anything, but because the chair still held his shape in my mind. I rested my hands on the desk and stared at the same surface Brianna claimed with a title and lost with a number she never bothered to learn. Outside my office window, the parking lot lights made small circles on the asphalt. Inside, the company breathed again, not perfectly, but steadily. And steady is what keeps people fed. Steady is what keeps a promise alive after the person who made it is gone. In the weeks that followed, the mess Brianna created didn't explode the way she probably hoped it would. It didn't turn into a scandal. It didn't turn into a screaming war. It turned into paperwork repairs and quiet correction, because that is what responsible adults do when children play with matches. The vendors calmed down once they heard the same voice again. Payroll ran on time without anyone holding their breath. The staff stopped walking on eggshells and started walking with purpose. I didn't punish people for being afraid. I didn't demand loyalty speeches. I didn't do victory laps in the lobby. I gave them something better than drama. I gave them normal. Howard Ellison and I set clear roles that didn't bruise anybody's pride. He remained a partner with his 10% respected and heard, and I didn't treat him like an enemy just because he hadn't known Richard's private decisions. If anything, I understood him better now. He had spent years watching Richard as the face, while I held the spine, and he had never asked how I kept the place from collapsing. That was his blind spot. Mine had been believing Brianna's smile meant something. I didn't keep making that mistake. The board met once formally to document what had already been true. No arguments, no back and forth. The moment the ledger was acknowledged, reality settled into place the way heavy furniture settles when you finally put it where it belongs. They asked me if I wanted the CEO title officially. I told them I wanted the authority to stabilize the company and that titles could come later if they insisted. They insisted, so I accepted it without fanfare. Not because I craved it, but because the company needed a clear name at the top, so people would stop whispering and start working. Leadership isn't an ego thing when you've got hundreds of lives connected to the decisions made in one building. Leadership is responsibility dressed up in whatever language the world demands. Brianna never returned. Not to the office, not to a board meeting, not to my home. She didn't send an apology. She didn't send an explanation. She didn't send a single sentence acknowledging the harm she did. At first, the absence sat in my chest like an unfinished conversation. Then slowly, I realized it wasn't unfinished at all. It was her answer. Some people can't apologize because apology requires admitting you were wrong. And admitting you were wrong requires facing the part of yourself you've been feeding in secret. Brianna had been feeding resentment for years. The company was just the table she finally flipped. Evelyn Mercer disappeared too. She took her embarrassment and ran because she wasn't coming back to handle accounts. She was coming back to reclaim a story. When the story rejected her, she left. My children stayed out of it the way I asked, though I could tell it cost them. They called me often not to fight but to check on my heart. They didn't need the company. They didn't need titles. They needed their mother to remain herself, the woman who didn't turn cruel just because she finally had the right to. And that was the part I protected most carefully, my own spirit. There were nights I went home and sat in my quiet house and felt Richard's absence like a weight on the couch beside me. There were mornings I reached for my phone to text him something small and then remembered. Grief doesn't leave because your life gets busy again. It just learns how to live in the corners without controlling the whole room. But I didn't let grief turn me vengeful. I didn't let betrayal turn me bitter, because bitterness is a second funeral, and I had already buried enough. What I did was simple. I protected what mattered. I protected the employees who had worked under Richard for years and deserved stability, not a daughter's tantrum. I protected the vendors who depended on consistency. I protected the legacy Richard built, not because a company is sacred, but because the people inside it are. And I protected my own dignity by refusing to shout for respect in a room where respect was always earned by the work, not the volume. Brianna thought silence meant weakness. She thought my calm meant I was afraid. She thought my patience meant I would swallow anything as long as it was delivered politely. I let her believe that. I let her fire me. I let her parade her mother into my space. I let her call me a burden and think it would stain me because I didn't need to argue with a girl who didn't know what she was touching. I only needed to wait until it was time to speak. And when I did, I didn't raise my voice. I raised the truth.